Skyros. Located just northeast of Athens, it's the largest island in the surrounding Sporades island group. It's known for its beautiful beaches and scenery, art and traditional Greek crafts, breathtaking archaeological sites. For some reason, a famous English writer who died off the coast of the island and was buried there. And the reason for my visit, a rare and endangered horse breed only naturally found on Skyros. While it's technically a pony in terms of height classification, its common name is still the Skyrian Horse. It's a critically endangered species that faces extinction. As of right now, there's only about 300 horses. Okay, before we get started, let me just go over some quick horse vocabulary that might come in handy during this video. A female horse over 4 years old is a mare, while a female under 4 is a filly. Likewise, a male above 4 is a stallion, and a male under 4 is a colt. A pony is just a classification determined by height. So under 147 centimeters at the withers, or 58 inches for my fellow Americans, a horse is considered a pony. A donkey is not a horse, but it is within the equine family, equine meaning a member of the horse family. And a mule is just the hybrid offspring between a male donkey and a female horse. They are sterile and cannot reproduce. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, hi, I'm Ricky. Just to introduce myself real quickly, I found this story while I was volunteering at Friends of the Skyrian Horse, which is a nonprofit dedicated to protecting the Skyrians. There I signed on to do media work for an upcoming crowdfunder for hay, and I also replaced some of the old fencing around the fields. I didn't do this alone, I had help from another volunteer, Mike. There were a few other volunteers, Laura, Anna, Rosie, and Chloe, who was Mike's daughter and really more of a manager.
I hold my stomach in.
Friends of the Skyrian Horse was founded about 20 years ago by Amanda Simpson and Stathy Katsarillius. The project now houses about 40 of the remaining 300 Skyrian horses. But it also acts as a sanctuary for a ton of other animals. In addition to their Skyrians, they have 3 larger horses, 3 farm dogs, Fred, Luna, and Max, a lot of chickens, a lot of cats, really a lot of cats, and a goat named Heidi, who's honestly just another dog, basically. I'd love to give more information about Friends of the Skyrian Horse, but just so I don't really mess up anything, I think I'll have Amanda Simpson take over from here.
We used to be called Skyros Island Horse Trust, and we then did our paperwork to become a Greek non-profit, so we're called Friends of the Skyrian Horse. What we've always sort of said we should be is welfare, conservation, and education. I think Greece gets kind of a hard rap sometimes. Greece didn't go through an industrial revolution, and therefore in some ways parts of its cultural perspective are somewhat out of date and trying to catch up, and in one of those places is animal welfare. When we first started working with the horses, we saw a lot of animals that were very thin, animals that had problems with their teeth, animals that were tied up for the rest of their lives on tiny little ropes, and part of that welfare issue is also supporting people on the island who maybe have problems with their horses, and rather than criticising them or damning them, actually going and helping them with their horses when they have problems.
A big reason for my visit was to learn about the potential for rewilding on the island. Rewilding being an effort to increase biodiversity and restore the natural processes of an ecosystem that typically involves reducing or ceasing human activity, and often the planned reintroduction of a plant or animal species, and especially a keystone species. In layman's terms, basically taking a species and putting them in a habitat where they might have some type of ecological benefit. In this case, that species would be the Skyrian horse, and the ecosystem would be an area of the island where the horses could graze freely. The benefit, however, is harder to pinpoint.
The Skyrian horse doesn't really have a sellable value in terms of it being a horse that would be used in the equine industries. But it does have a value within things like biodiversity, regenerative grazing, and it would give them some hope as being kept as a breed. But there are huge rules around the Skyrian horse not leaving the island, and so it's actually very difficult for the horses to be able to leave the island.
So if you can't use the Skyrians to race or as beasts of burden, what's the point of protecting them? A key aspect that helped me realize the Skyrians' potential came from learning wild. An educational program and workshop hosted by Dr. Emily Keeson and Bonnie Meeland. Together, they travel the world studying the behavior of wild horses and equines, and, in turn, transfer the required knowledge to others through various lectures and hands-on lessons. They had traveled to Skyros to do exactly that, share their research with friends of the Skyrian horse, and to also demonstrate the proper way of taking care of a horse. However, there was more than one reason for them to come to the island. As specialists who study free-living equine, it makes a lot of sense that they would come to Skyros. See, while there's a few projects on the island that house the Skyrian horses, Friends of the Skyrian Horse being one of them, there's still rumor of there being wild Skyrians still actually on the island, more specifically in the mountain area, which has a lot of wild grazing. The chances of actually seeing a wild Skyrian on the island were slim to none. However, our expectations were completely blown away. As soon as we pulled into the spot we were supposed to meet everybody at, there were 2 wild equine grazing. We actually had a picnic by them. It was really cool. It was like I was in Mamma Mia. I half expected Meryl Streep to pop out of a tree and start singing Fernando. After watching the horses for a while, we actually met with Crisanti, who works on different projects regarding land management and tourism on the island.
Even if you do this, try to cultivate the land and create more for grazing, 30% of the animals, of the 45,000 sheep and goats that exist today, should be decreased.
After Crisanti's presentation, we decided to split up and see if we could see more horses. So some of us went down the trail while the others had to go back to the farm and scoop poop.
See you later, guys.
I was lucky enough to go down the trail. And boom, immediately 2 more wild horses right on the left. And we stayed for a long time too. They were just sort of grazing and kind of looking at us, being all confused. Eventually Anna and I wanted to go see what else was down the trail, so we sort of split off. And after walking for a while, Anna and I saw this beautiful dark horse. And I turned to Anna and I was like, "You see that horse right there?" And she was like, "Well, hold on, dummy. That's not a horse at all. That's actually a mule." And I was like, "Oh, okay, weird. That's not a horse. Is that a horse?" I didn't know what a mule was at the moment. I kind of thought it was a horse. I couldn't really tell the difference. I don't know. It looked like a horse. That mule followed us for a while. It followed us down the trail. And it actually kind of freaked us out because it was getting very close to us. We didn't know if it was being territorial or it wanted food from us. So we honestly played it safe and thought, he's being kind of skittish. Let's go back to the car and call it a day. It was an incredible experience and it was so cool. And honestly, the vibes were very high. Everybody was feeling good and it felt like we needed a party or a celebration or something. And luckily for us, that's exactly what happened. Skyros, which really does not have a nightlife at all, had completely transformed. That weekend, Skyros was hosting Apokrios, a Lenten festival in the Greek Orthodox calendar. This particular festival is known throughout Greece and hosts a lot of national tourists. And the festival lasts the whole weekend with different days pertaining to different events and meanings. During that weekend, every ticket to and from the island had been completely sold out. The men dress in goat skin with bells and imitate the old man, or Geros. The festival was filled with great food and dancing, and I, as an American tourist, was able to completely intrude on it. The next day, Bonnie and Emily wanted to actually go back up to the mountain, and I, being the trainee that I was able to go, this time with Laura. And again, this time, our luck proceeded. We saw a lot of wild equine. They weren't right outside the car, but they were just down the trail hanging out by our little reservoir. I was ecstatic, and I think the others were too, but looking at it now, my excitement came from a huge misunderstanding. We hung back when we saw them and gave them their space just so we weren't intruding on them, but surprisingly, they all started coming towards us. After watching the horses for a bit, I was actually able to interview Dr. Emily Keeson and Bonnie Mealand about some of their work they do.
Hi, my name's Bonnie Mealand. I'm Emily Keeson. And together we run Learning Wild Courses. I'm an equine podiatrist and I specialise in working with wild horses. And I travel the world and study free-living horses and equines of all kinds to learn about horse behaviour.
I'm Executive Director of Equine International. The purpose of my work in Learning Wild is to collect data and try and better understand how horses live their lives, how we fit into their lives, and then bring that back to the work that we do in the domestic world. We have a fundamental set of theory that we work with that's updated constantly with new research, new science, updated information. The trick is that's really about, okay, what is the research, and then where we are, it's really about how that's applied to that environment, that culture, those people, those horses.
Really what's so important wherever we are is for people to realise just the intrinsic value of horses being horses. And if we can show that and we can showcase that and we could offer a similar model to the one that we have developed, then I think I would die happy.
After my trips to the mountain, I was just so excited and enthused. I mean, I thought I had just seen one of the last examples of this rare and endangered species in the wild. And so I actually asked Amanda what she thought of the footage, what she thought of these pictures I just showed her.
The Skyrian people would say there's never really been a wild horse, it's always been owned. So it would be on the mountains for some parts of the year when there was grazing, and then it would be brought down from the mountains when there's not grazing to do agricultural jobs. That's what would have happened historically. Also, historically, anywhere in Greece, when an old man dies or an old person dies who had a donkey, and donkey was their main transportation, when they died and the family didn't want the donkey, they'd have just stuck it onto a common piece of grazing land, which the mountain here, Tovourno, is a common piece of grazing land. And so the donkey would then mate with horses and produce mules. And then the mules produce a whole nother set of problems, because a mule, although sterile, the male mules have very high testosterone, which can make them very aggressive because they're working from a place of instinct, and they attack the stallions, the horse stallions, and cause large wounds frequently on their necks where they gash them, fighting for the mares.
I messed up.
And another issue is that also people sometimes put bigger horses that are not Skyrian horses, which breed with the Skyrian horses, which then produce a not purebred Skyrian horse. The mountain still has some loose horses on it, for want of a better word. But, so in terms of environmental change, one, the mountain is completely overgrazed by sheep and goats, so there's not enough food for the horses. If the horses are on the mountain, frequently they're starving. There are limited water sources on the mountain, apart from the water sources for sheep and goats, which many of the shepherds don't want the horses to utilise, because often that's where they're also feeding their sheep and goats, and so the horses are eating the feed of the sheep and goats. And culturally, the sheep and goats produce money, and so of course the shepherds want to protect their economy.
I had never felt so completely ignorant or oblivious to a situation in my life, because I could have just asked one of the several horse experts that I was with, what are these? I just sort of thought, oh, they're horses. We're on Skyros. It must be the Skyrian horse. That makes sense to me. 1 and 2, but I was totally wrong. I was totally wrong. And after going over all of my footage again, I was actually able to see, oh yeah, these definitely are different than the Skyrian horse. That one is clearly a mule. These other ones are just sort of the mudbloods of the Skyrian horse. I'm reading Harry Potter right now. That was nerdy. And yeah, I saw exactly the behavior Amanda was describing. I saw the hoof kicks, I saw biting, scars, overall aggression, the rope around one's neck. But I was still kind of confused as to what a Skyrian horse actually was. Why are some individuals not actually classified true Skyrians? Is it just because one parent is different than the other? And luckily, I was actually able to speak with Dr. Ariane Hadger, who has helped monitor and record the Skyrian stud book, and is also an assistant professor of gene technology and farm animals at the Agricultural University of Athens.
Okay, we are not actually trying to determine a good example of a genetic based on genetics. We go the other way around. So there is a breed standard that the society has decided upon based on what they consider as good examples phenotypically of Skyrian horses. Based on the animals that exist now on the island, but also mainly based on historic data on what a Skyrian horse looked like.
So the definition of a Skyrian horse is just determined by some people on the island who say what they look like? Well, basically, and to be honest with you, it makes a lot of sense.
When we started, we're very conscious that there were tall horses, small horses, different coloured and with lots of white markings on them horses that didn't fit the conformation of a Skyrian horse. And so conservation was about trying to bring the breed back to a breed standard, to some sense of identity of what is this little horse or this pony, what is it supposed to look like, what are its characteristics. I suppose one of our successes and failings is we had a lot of foals up until around 2013, but a lot of our older horses are still with us. So we've had a very, touch wood, low death rate, which means how to manage the horses you have. We actually haven't been producing more horses because we don't have the space for them and we don't have the funds for them, because what would we do with the old horses? We still want to protect them and care for them and look after them.
After my pretty disappointing conversation with Amanda and my realizations that I had sort of duped myself by having all of these sort of preconceived assumptions, I felt like I needed to go back to the mountain and actually see what was going on there. Have a fresh perspective. I hate vlogging. This is stupid. Okay. So getting to where I wanted to come to, but you can see just how many. Let me zoom in. You can see how many grazing animals there are here. Crazy. I had, still a slight sliver of hope. See if we can see any of the horses grazing. Maybe a wild Skyrian would show up and it would be so abundantly clear to me that that's a Skyrian horse. But no, of course that didn't happen. Actually, I didn't see any equine at all. The only thing I did notice was the abundance of two things: sheep and goats. I don't know, they're all just kind of wondering, what am I doing? What is a vlog? That's what they're all asking themselves. In general, it's cool. It's cool to see. It's cool to see the wild grazing. Now they're spooked. I actually took up my drone to see if I could get a different look, you know, a better angle. But no, still nothing. It was an overgrazed desert with no formal land management. So, will the Skyrian horse ever get back to the mountain? Maybe. But for the time being, it looks unlikely. In addition to the overgrazing, there's also a proposed wind farm that's been in talks for almost 10 years now, which would completely decimate the Skyrians. And I'm not talking about just the horse. To answer the question that I raised earlier, if you can't use the Skyrian horses to race or as beasts of burden, what's the point of protecting them? Well, in my opinion, that answer is pretty simple. It's our obligation. The Skyrians do have value, even economical. It's just not as quick of a turnaround as I think a sheep or a goat. You know, you can't milk them. I don't think. Like Amanda said, the Skyrians would be great for regenerative grazing projects or even tourist projects, but they require significant investment, which is something that only a small number of people are willing to do at the moment. So I honestly think the better question to ask is, what happens to the Skyrian after these people are gone?
Somebody said to me about 15 years ago, they died about 10 years ago. If you commit yourself to the Skyrian horse, you'll die a bitter old lady. And it stayed with me, that quote, because I definitely don't want to die a bitter old lady.
He's a good boyfriend. Say hello to the camera.
What I think is deeply sad is that the island has this unique, critically endangered species of mammal, this little Skyrian equine. And if there was the will, and if there was the education, and if there were collaborations, those groups of people could come together to produce something that would not just be good for the Skyrian horse, but it would also be good for a landscape. We're here for just a split bloody second, you know, we're here for so little, and we don't have the sense of, you know, land is about, should be being protected by all of us, and those things that exist on it we should be coexisting with, not trying to rule over. You know, my dream for the horses would be to protect a large piece of land that they can graze on and thereby protect them, but also be protecting the environment, the green environment, earth, nature, land, soil, Gaia. And that's a thing worth doing, you know. Things have, nothing is black and white. They're all shades of grey. Anyway, I think these bales of hay are full of fleas.
Oh, no. Okay.
Well, it's inevitable, really. What time is it?